At the beginning of this course, I said that the basic difference between virtue ethics and act-based ethics is that act-based theories are primarily concerned with the question, what should I do? While virtue theories are primarily concerned with the question, what kind of person do I want to be? Act-based theories come up with rules, in the best case, one supreme rule or principle to distinguish a right act from a wrong act. So classical utilitarianism is an important example of an act-based theory because it sets up one moral principle that is intended to tell us what to do in any given situation. Act in a way that produces the best consequences, where the best consequences are determined by the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for the greatest number of people. Kant's categorical imperative is the ultimate moral principle in the other major act-based theory in modern ethics. One important form of that principle says to act in a way that treats every human being not merely as a means, but always at the same time as an end in itself. Respect for rationality in each person draws a line between what is morally permissible and what is not. Act-based theories are enormously influential, but many people think that they're vulnerable to important objections. One problem is that there is more to be concerned about in living a good life than performing acts that are right. Living a good life is not the same thing as going through life avoiding wrong acts and doing the right thing as often as you can. We all want to live a flourishing, fulfilling life and to live in flourishing communities. Classical act-based theories do not tell us much about that. There is also the worry that the morality of acts might not be strictly rule-governed anyway. That is, there might not always be a rule that fits every person in every circumstance. Think about all the practical choices a person can make, like how to play your hand in poker, or when to sell a certain stock, or whether to tell someone a hurtful truth. Only the last one is a moral choice, but the same point might apply in the other cases. There are not enough rules to cover every situation, so rules are not enough. But you might say that at least act-based theories have rules, and rules can be very useful. Isn't it an advantage of act-based theories that they have rules that we can refer to in making choices? How much guidance in acting do we get from virtue theory? Rosalind Hursthouse answers, quite a bit. Virtue ethics does generate norms for acting that she calls V rules or virtue rules. Act justly, act compassionately, act courageously, act humbly, act generously, and so on for all the virtues. Given what we said about practical wisdom in the last lecture, the bottom line would be the rule, act in the way a person with practical wisdom would act. But that is not very precise. Isn't it more precise to have rules like don't lie? Well, maybe, but the greater precision of act-based theories might be an illusion for at least two reasons. One is that a virtue theory will generate most of the same rules as other moral theories. For instance, a rule like don't lie follows from the virtue rule that says be honest. But more importantly, rules sometimes mislead us because either there are exceptions that the rule ignores, or the rule requires interpretation that makes it hard to apply. For instance, some moral philosophers argue that the rule don't lie has no exceptions, but not every untruth is a lie. That makes the decision procedure seem simple, but it just shifts the burden to figuring out what counts as a lie. It could be better to devote our time in moral deliberation to reflecting about the nature of honesty and why we owe it to each other, rather than creating rules precise enough to settle every case. In the last lecture, I said that Aristotle makes practical wisdom, or phronesis, the key virtue. The right thing to do, all things considered, is what a person with practical wisdom would judge it to be. Perhaps practically wise people follow rules that they can teach us. But maybe a person with practical wisdom sees what to do, but she cannot fully explain why it is the right thing. That would mean that knowing what to do in every moral situation requires having a kind of wisdom that only a few people have and maybe nobody has fully. That makes it hard for us to turn ethics into a precise science. But as Aristotle said, not every science can be made precise, and ethics is one of those that cannot be precise. What about theories that focus on rights? Are they better at dealing with hard moral issues like abortion? Rosalind Hursthouse argues in a paper you're reading this week that virtue ethics is actually in a better position to handle the problem of abortion than act-based theories. Most of the discussion of the morality of abortion focuses on the status of the human fetus. Does it have rights? If so, how should those rights be weighed against the mother's rights? Hursthouse argues that the question of rights is often beside the point. Even if we assume that the mother has a right to an abortion could be morally wrong because in the exercise of a right, we can do something cruel or callous or selfish or stupid or disloyal or dishonest. Hursthouse then argues that in order to determine the virtuous thing to do, we need to take into account biological and social facts about human reproduction that are very familiar but which are largely ignored in the theories that focus on rights rather than virtues. The biological and social facts about how babies are made and born and grow into adulthood shows us that all of us started as fetuses, and motherhood is a valuable human state that normally contributes to a flourishing life. The death of a fetus is always sad and is sometimes tragic. That is morally relevant because it explains why abortion can sometimes be a selfish or childish or shallow thing to do, or materialistic or short-sighted or callous. She thinks it can also be a choice that is not vicious at all, but shows that something is terribly amiss in a woman's life. A woman may lack the kind of support that makes thriving possible for her. There can be virtues lacking in the community that put all of the burden on the pregnant woman. So whether or not an abortion violates the virtue of justice is one question. Whether it violates other virtues is another question. Focusing on rights ignores some of the most important questions. Hursthouse argues in a different paper that virtue theory has the same advantage in explaining the proper treatment of animals. To talk about the moral status of non-human animals misses some of the most important facts about the relationship between humans and animals. To illustrate the defects of the rights approach to morality, she asks us to consider the relationship between her and her cat. Almost everybody says that she is more valuable than her cat, meaning that if somebody can only rescue one of them from a burning building, they should rescue her rather than the cat. But then she asks, what if she escapes by herself? Should you rescue the cat? Most people say no, unless you really can do it with no danger to yourself at all, because you outrank the cat too. You are much more important than the cat. She says, fine, but would you say the same thing about what she should do? Should she try to rescue the cat? The answer, she says, is not nearly as obvious, because the relevant point now is not that she is human and the cat is a cat, but that the cat is her cat. She has a relationship with the cat and has assumed responsibility for the cat. She agrees that she would have to be a sentimental idiot to risk dying to save the cat, but if she can rescue him without taking a great deal of risk, she ought to do it. The point here is that moral status and moral rights are not the only thing relevant to this decision. Personal relationships, including relationships with animals, have moral weight that can be explained in a virtue theory, where the virtues arising from love and friendship and from compassion and sympathy can easily be extended beyond the human realm. When discussing the morality of abortion, we need to consider familiar biological facts about human reproduction and the social facts about the rearing of the young. When discussing the moral treatment of animals, we need to consider the social facts about human-animal relationships, and I think also potential relationships. Once we do that, we are led to consider a lot of other relationships that have not been a traditional part of virtue ethics, like our relationship to the whole biological environment and our relationship to future generations. In class, we can talk about what kind of relationship we have with the future state of the world and what virtues, either new or old, should govern that relationship.